Good evening, and thank you all for joining us here at International House at the University of Chicago for this very special program. My name is Denise Jorgens. I'm the director here at International House, and I'm the president of International Houses Worldwide. And I mention that because it's of interest that we are part of a network of 19 houses on 4 continents. This evening's event is one of many special programs celebrating our 85th anniversary. Today's program is presented by the International House Global Voices program, the program on the global environment, the Arts, Science, and Culture Initiative, the Phoenix Sustainability Initiative, and the Fritzl Speaker and Learning Series. This program is also is made possible in part by the generous support of one of our alumna, Bart Lazar. Bart is a longtime supporter of iHouse, and we are pleased that he's able to join us here today. I look forward to seeing all of you here at International House throughout the remainder of the academic year as we continue to celebrate turning 85. This is a moment for all of us to reflect on and to celebrate our enduring mission to enable students and scholars from around the world to live and learn together in a diverse community that builds lifelong qualities of leadership, respect, and friendship. Thank you again for coming this evening, and thank you to all the members of our community for your ongoing commitment and dedication to our mission. And now I'd like to welcome Caitlin Picarillo Stosser, who is a 4th year Economics and Public Policy double major. She currently serves as the student coordinator of the Fritzl Committee and the Environment, Agriculture and Food Working Group, EAF. Thank you again, and welcome, Caitlin.
Thank you for that great introduction. Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Caitlin. I'm the student coordinator of the EAF group as well as the Fritzl committee on campus. First, I'd like to remind everyone to please go vote for our fantastic student exhibitors who we had here today, and I'd really like to thank them for journeying here, some of them from downtown, and then of course, everyone is already super busy with a lot of schoolwork, and I really appreciate them taking the time to come here today. So please go vote if you haven't already. You should all have gotten a bean when you walked in, and we're going to be announcing the winner at intermission, not at the end as we originally had said, so please go vote now. I won't mind if you get up now while I'm talking and go vote. Anyway. So again, I just on behalf of the Fritzl Speaker and Learning Series, I'd like to thank all of you for coming today. The Fritzl Series is a year-long student-run series of events that engages the fields of environment, health, and food. The series is meant to commemorate the life accomplishments and aspirations of Alexandra Fritzl, who's a student here in the college. Tonight, we are very excited to join the Global Voices program at the International House, the Arts, Science, and Culture Initiative, and Bart Lazar in hosting Lisa Schomburg and the Secret Drum Band. Lisa is a composer, percussionist, and environmental activist. Throughout college and graduate school, she studied ecology and entomology, and since then has done extensive field work. While working as a field biologist, Lisa was drawn to soundscapes, and as a drummer, she decided to use her skills in performance and composition to protect wild places. Her work is dedicated to connecting the arts to environmental issues such as threats to public lands, habitat loss, and endangered species. Lisa founded the Secret Drum Band to document habitats and soundscapes through music, and the band's compositions raise awareness about the relationships between humans, ecology, and music. With that, I am very honored to introduce Lisa Schomburg.
Thank you so much, and thanks everyone for being here. Thank you to International House and to everyone who had a part in organizing tonight's event, and to my bandmates for driving from Portland to Chicago in just under 6 days' time together, and hauling gear into and out of venues every day. Anyways, figured. So my name is Lisa Schoenberg, and I'm from Staten Island, New York. But together with my bandmates, we all live in Portland, Oregon. And so, as she was saying, I grew up playing drums and started drumming in the school band. But living in Staten Island, I didn't have that much exposure to like what we could call wild places. But every time I did step into the woods, it really sparked my mind, and I really wondered about what was out there, and had a concern about environmental issues, even though I hadn't really stepped foot or really gone hiking or even like ever set up a tent or slept in one. And then when I went off to college in upstate New York, I had the opportunity for the first time to really spend time in the woods, and I switched from a music major to an environmental studies major and started taking ecology courses, and became especially interested in insects and the ants in particular. And so that kind of, started, my life kind of took a turn at that point, but I continued playing music and always had at least 2, maybe 3 or 4 bands going on at the same time. And moved across the country to go to grad school at the Evergreen State College in Olympia. Has anyone been to Olympia, Washington? Yeah, Gooey Ducks. So I got my Master's of Environmental Studies there, and I was lucky enough to study with 2 wonderful professors, Jack Longino, who's an expert in neotropical ants, and Nalini Nadkarni, who happens to be his wife, and she's this extraordinary ecologist who has done a lot of groundbreaking work about the canopy, so the top of the forest. And I was able to work with both of them, and they both were a big inspiration to me. Nalini especially reached out to different kinds of audiences to get people such as prisoners and spiritual leaders and hip-hop artists engaged with environmental issues. So it kind of planted this seed in my head to how I could possibly combine my interests. So that's a little background about where I come from. And while I was at Evergreen, I was doing field work mostly in Costa Rica, running around collecting ants and doing biodiversity studies on them. But I always paid a lot of attention to the sounds around me, and I became really interested in these fields, acoustic ecology, soundscape ecology, and I started reading books by Murray Schafer and the guy who's quoted up here, Bernie Krause, and they're some of the leaders in these fields, and they basically have really established conversations around the importance of looking at sound and soundscapes in environments as to clues as to the condition of a space or habitat disturbance, as opposed to just counting the amount of species that are there or any traditional quantitative studies. So I was getting really into reading about this and listening more, and I jot down musical ideas while I was out collecting ants. And so this is a quote from Bernie Krause that I especially like. A great silence is spreading over the natural world, even as the sound of man is becoming deafening. So it's really hard to find places where we don't have man-made sounds intruding. And man-made sounds can set the balance, the acoustic balance in ecosystems, set it off balance. So I started thinking about how I could combine these things. And once I graduated from grad school, I was doing field biology jobs in Washington State and in Hawaii, and also touring with my bands in the US and Europe. And while we went around the US, I would collect insect specimens and field recordings. And but the best idea I could come with so far, as far as how to combine my interests, was to go into the woods and like have a just drum circle jam among the birds. But thankfully, my friend Emily asked me to do a solo exhibit in her gallery. She's like, "You really like insects and art. How about you know, I'd never done this before." So she gave me this opportunity, and I put together an exhibit using the things I'd collected on tour with my band and on some camping trips. And so there were insect specimens and field recordings from the places that I collected them and drawings of the insects, along with some natural history information about them. And then, so I was getting more and more excited about these ideas. And then in 2011, I got a grant to write a big composition for Secret Drum Band, which had only existed once before as a four-piece, like 10 years before. And so what I did is I spent a week on Mount Hood in Oregon. It's pretty much like the mountain in the backyard of Portland. And I was at an artist residency with a wonderful program called Signal Fire, and they bring artists to public lands. And I sat at my tent and listened and wrote a piece called Mount Hood, which the ensemble then performed. And so this was the first time that I really composed a full piece of music based on a habitat. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my process. And I basically would just sit outside and listen for things and then write down percussive, rhythmic ideas of what I heard. And I just wrote down any idea that came to mind, knowing that probably only a few of them would end up getting used in the end. And I jot down like things that I thought would go well together, sometimes based on what I was hearing or based on what I thought fit well rhythmically. And I, like this is a page from a field notebook of mine, and I knew how to do percussive notation, so I just write out the notes like that so it's easy to refer to later. And then I'd also like pay attention to the larger soundscape, so the combination of all sounds in my environment, and think about how that could inform the mood and the arrangement of the piece of music itself. And while I'm doing that, I'm making recordings that I can refer to later. So it's a combination of composing on-site and then later in my studio at home. And some of it is based on just mimicking what I hear and representing it with percussion or sometimes melodic sounds or textures. And then some of it is actually just taking recordings and making loops out of them. And you'll hear when we perform later, like actual field recordings in our music. And then sometimes it's just abstraction, like I'm just sitting in a place and taking in how it feels to sit in this desert or tropical forest or beach and writing music based on that. And then I also look around and take visual cues, so sometimes that comes to play more often than others. And the audio software that I've come to love is Ableton Live, and my bandmate Alan, who also writes music in the band, and I have really loved this program. And when I get back to wherever I'm staying or my studio, I'll throw in the ideas I came up with in the field and see how they work out together. And that can be done without either live drums or just tapping on whatever's around or using MIDI drums. And then the process of experimenting with arrangements and building the song actually starts. So, kind of put in the ideas that came up in the field. And so I wanted to talk about a few particular projects that I've done since the Mount Hood composition, and how my ideas and our ideas as a band have evolved through all these projects. In 2012, we were invited to go down to Joshua Tree, California, to stay on the land of an artist named Andrea Zattel. She's fabulous, and she makes functional art, basically like things you could live in or things you could wear. And she also has like a compound where artists can come and stay and think about their work or make new work. And so we were lucky enough to be able to spend a month there. And Alan Wilson and I, Alan right there, one of the members of Secret Drum Band, we spent a week or two roaming around the desert collecting field recordings. And our objective was to create a new body of work that was based on the desert environment around us. And we invited one of our bandmates to make costumes and one of our videographer friends to come along to make videos, and there was 2 dancers that we invited to make work. And so this was like a collaborative effort where everyone was really looking in our immediate surroundings for things to inform our art. And we found it was really exceptionally quiet there at that time of year. It was October. And so we really had to look hard for sounds and ended up manipulating things in our environment to get sounds and making a lot of use out of contact mics. So this is a cactus that we had a lot of fun with by like putting a contact mic on it and plucking the spines to get different tones. And our work was presented in 2 performances. One at night with projections on the boulders, and each field recording was projected through its own channel and its own speaker. We brought like 12 speakers with us. And then we had another performance that was off-site and unpowered. But I wanted to play you just a song from that. This piece is actually composed by Alan Wilson. My iPad doesn't want to go on. So all of those tones you're hearing are each from cactus spines. So we had a lot of fun with that, well, especially Alan did. And so our songs from that trip contained sounds from like a metal roof that was changing shape as the clouds passed over it, or like found metal. There was rusted out found metal everywhere we went, or there were different tones in the layers of decomposing rock on the boulders that were everywhere, and different plants created different sounds when we placed a contact mic on them and touched them in different ways. So, and we used a lot of samples of water on that project, and so it was called Hits of Sunshine, and it was basically like a side project of Secret Drum Band, and we performed some of the songs from that project to this day, and we put out a little cassette of that work. And so that project was like a really fun and successful experiment as to how we could like look at an environment and make art in response to it. And then soon after that, I started this work called the Hylaeus Project. Shortly after grad school, if we rewind a little bit, I took a job with the Xerxes Society for Invertebrate Conservation, and they're a wonderful nonprofit group that's headquartered in Portland, but they do international work, and they protect invertebrates, so they speak up for the little guys. And so that includes anything from like freshwater mussels to pollinators, like aquatic insects, caddisflies, snails, things. So they're doing amazing work, and I was there for about a year, and one of the things they asked me to work on was reviewing the status of a group of bees in the genus Hylaeus that live in Hawaii. And there are 63 known species of Hylaeus in Hawaii, and they're the only native bees there. And so the Xerces Society thought there was a chance of getting them listed as endangered species with the federal government. So they're like, look at this list and come up with the species that you think are the best candidates. So I got in touch with an expert on these bees, Carl Magnacca in Hawaii, and together we wrote petitions to get them listed as endangered. And it took about 7 years, but they were listed in 2016, shortly before our current administration took over, and they were the first bees listed as endangered species, and there's 7 species listed. But, so these bees are not what you think of, when you hear the word bee, probably honeybee comes to mind, but these don't look anything like honeybees, and they don't act anything like honeybees. They're quite small. This is a Hylaeus bee on a ohia flower, so they're 5 to 7 millimeters long, and they're solitary, so they don't have colonies, they don't make honey, they are not aggressive and don't sting, and the female will mate and then go make her own nest in a hole in the ground or a twig or a piece of coral, and lay her eggs and put provisions with them, and then that's about it. So they don't have these like huge social networks. They do nest in aggregations where there's like a suitable habitat. There'll be a lot of them. But anyway, so I learned a lot about these bees and while at Xerces, and it did take 7 years to get them listed. And in that time, I did a creative project on them called the Hylaeus Project, because through working on them at Xerces, I realized that I had somehow become one of the world's leading experts on them, because no one has paid attention to them. There was Carl, and so this is Carl's work that he put out in 1991, and it's basically a review of the genus Hylaeus in Hawaii. It's amazing, important work, because by doing this, he found that they had declined precipitously since the last person had looked at them. And the last person who looked at them was this guy, R.C.L. Perkins. He was a British guy, British naturalist, who was roaming around the Hawaiian Islands in the 1890s. And he called them almost the most ubiquitous of any Hawaiian insects. And then when Carl looked at them in the 1990s, they had vanished from most of those locations. And then here I am, looking at them for maybe a period of 6 months, and like, wait a second, like, what can I do? Maybe this could fit into this thing I'm working on as far as, combining art and science. So I got some funding and carried out this project. And my goals with this were to use art and creative work to bring attention to these bees, and to work directly with an entomologist in an effort to integrate scientific knowledge and creativity, to like have a certain level of scientific expertise in the work. So I invited artist Aiden Koch. She's an illustrator that I knew in Portland who does amazing work, and we spent time on 3 islands, Kauai, Oahu, and the Big Island, and visited habitats where the bees were known to exist, or some of their former habitats. And Aiden made illustrations, and we wrote a ton, and wrote a book. It's right here, which you could check out after the talk, called the Hylaeus Project, and it has Aiden's illustrations in it. But my focus while she was doing illustrations was listening. And so even though these bees are really small, and I didn't have the technology or know-how to capture their sounds, if they were indeed making any, I decided that these habitats, these very few remaining habitats that they're hanging on at, are so important, I decided to document those habitats. So I was listening to sounds in the places that they live and making new music. And so this is one of the places where there was actually maybe what you could possibly call a swarm of Hylaeus, like the most I saw on the entire trip, and they nest in the holes in the bleached coral. And this is on the Kona coast of Hawaii. And here are some of Aiden's drawings. These are 2 of the native plants that the bees love to visit, koa and ohia. And something that's really important about these bees is that they visit almost entirely native plant species, which are really sharply in decline in Hawaii. So it's like the conservation of both of those is really tied together. And Aiden did some wonderful comics too, and watercolors. And so this watercolor is being held up in the habitat where she drew it, and that place is called Kapuka-Pu'ulu, and it's on the Big Island. Oops. And a kapuka is basically an island of forest that at one point was surrounded by lava, and then this forest is left spared, and so they're very special places. And this one particular kapuka is an important habitat for the bees, and it's so dense with bird call any time of the day. This is one of my favorite places. When I worked in Hawaii as an entomologist, I visited it a lot, and it's always like just so thick with bird call there. This is what it sounds like there. And so I decided to write a song using these calls, and I picked out different calls and wrote percussive parts for them, and tried to create a piece that had rhythms juxtaposed in the way that this place has bird calls juxtaposed. And we'll play that song later, and it's called Kapuka-Pu'ulu, and I'll mention it when we get to it in the performance. But our nickname for the song is Crazy Town because it was really hard to find the downbeat when we were learning it. It's intentionally kind of made it a little bit complicated. So yeah, that's the Hylaeus project. And that project was really eye-opening because it got a lot of positive reception in Hawaii, and I went back twice to present talks about it. And a lot of people just didn't even know that these bees were a thing, that they existed, or that they were so important to native plants. I mean, I didn't know until I ever went there to Hawaii and worked as an entomologist. And so it was really cool to talk to people about it and to just learn about it myself by hanging out with the lead entomologist there. And in the time that the bees have gotten listed, there's been additional funding and resources given to learning about them. So another project I want to talk about briefly is environmental impact statement. And I started this with 2 women in Portland. And our goal was to basically get artists to come to Mount Hood National Forest, that same place I mentioned earlier, and show them what's going on as far as land use there, and ask them to respond with creative work that we would then show to the community. And the goal was to basically get conversations happening in the art community about land use on Mount Hood, and then through that also to get the information out to the larger community and arts audiences. And so a lot of this had to do with logging sales in the either places that had been logged or places that were slated to be logged or being considered to be logged, and looking at what areas should be logged, what are the concerns, what are the ecological concerns, how much logging do we need, should this even be happening here, and just presenting all these questions and talking together. And another issue we looked at was the Oxbow Creek in the gorge, where the Nestle company wanted to build a bottling plant. And so we were kind of talking about that. The governor overturned that project this year, so it's not happening. But that was part of the discussion too. And it was so interesting because a lot of people had never even heard the term logging sale or went to these areas in the mountain, because it's very easy to go visit this mountain and not see a trace of logging. Which leads to the title of another project that we did, which was called Visual Quality Objectives. And in that project, we asked artists to submit comments as part of the public comment period for an environmental impact statement, which is, so our name comes from actual legally required document that's needed before any development happens on public lands. And so there's a public comment period, and so we invited artists to make proposals of work that wouldn't be able to happen if that area was logged. And so they're like, well, I want to dance around this old growth tree, but if you take it down, I can't do that. It was as simple as that. And so those were the comments. The projects were more creative than that, but basically. the format, and we submitted them in the formal public comment process. And we've since done it twice more, and we have a new director out in Minneapolis, actually, who's taken this on himself and become one of our collaborators. And he did a similar process for Standing Rock, and then also for the Polymet mining proposal that's currently being considered in Minnesota. So the visual quality objectives title came from we took that from government lingo, because when they hide all the logging and make sure that you can't see it from the freeway, that's one of the visual quality objectives that they're considering. So we're like, well, we have our own visual quality objectives that will be created by artists, and that will just make those part of the conversation as well. So that's that project, and that's been ongoing and like has to do with, there's a lot of different input from a lot of amazing artists. And as part of that, I wrote a piece. Well, I made field recordings at Oxbow Spring, but I also wrote a piece called Jazz Timber Sale. There's a timber sale named Jazz in Mount Hood. And we'll be performing that later, and it includes sounds that we heard in the forest of the logging truck and of different like human-introduced elements, as well as characteristics of the forest. And my friend and collaborator, Jody Cavalier, made a video in that same location that we'll be showing. And so a lot of these pieces I've been talking about so far, we recorded on our first full-length record. We put that out last year, and Alan and I couldn't agree on a cover, so I wanted to feature work by David Koch, who I did the Bee project with, and then he was very excited about this guy Rich Art, who's this artist up in Centralia, Washington, and we really liked each other's ideas a lot too, so this is what happened. We have two artworks. There's one, my most recent work, which I think the drums are kind of blocking the wording, but I was lucky enough last summer to be able to visit the Brazilian Amazon with a program called Lab Verde. And the goal of Lab Verde is to bring artists into the Amazon environment and ask them to make work in response, and bring scientists in as sources of information and to create conversations between artists and scientists. And so every day we had lectures and time in the field, and then we made work from the field work. So, back when Alan and I were in the desert, we were putting contact mics everywhere, trying to find sound anywhere, and then he suggested that we put it in the trail of some ants walking into a nest, and we picked up like these crazy sounds that we didn't even think were real at first. It turns out ants do make sounds, and they stridulate, similar to the way a cricket might do it, where they rub their leg along a ridged surface. So the ants do that, but they have the ridged surface and the sort of the scraper between the second and third body segments. And so they make stridulation sounds, but they also drum. Ants are drummers. And I found out about this, I think a couple of years ago, and I was just like floored that they wrap different parts of their body, either the head or the abdomen, which with an ant is called a gaster, against the surface. So I decided that I would spend my time with Lab Verde recording ants. And as this project has progressed, I've come up with different goals and reasons why I want to do this. And I got in touch with an entomologist, more specifically a myrmecologist, that's someone who studies ants, who works in the Amazon, and he had already been working with Lab Verde, and his name's Fabrizio Boccaro, and he's a musician, so it was kind of like a perfect pairing. I never thought that I would find like the perfect collaboration like on the other side of the world, but I did, and it was appropriate to be talking about it in International House. But so Fabrizio and I together got very excited about this idea of recording ants. And so he kind of helped me out with gear and identifications, and we have been doing a literature review together with one of his students, and they've been processing my field recordings, and we're looking forward to continuing this work. Okay. But one of the reasons I really wanted to do it is just to help encourage appreciation for ants and other smaller organisms and for their really important roles as ecosystem engineers. And I was surprised when I found out that they made sound, especially after studying them in grad school, because most people talk about pheromone and chemical communication when they talk about ants. So I was like really interested in emphasizing the sense of mystery. And to me, like there's a very direct connection between ants and the work they're doing and like our role in the world, because the ants, they aerate the soil, they distribute seeds, they are one of the biggest herbivores and predators in the rainforest, and so they're keeping that rainforest functioning. Without them, it would just go kaput. And then the rainforest is keeping the atmosphere on the whole planet intact and functioning, right? And we're kind of like not helping the process at all. And so this project for me is like a tribute to them and sort of like and asking to like sort of pay attention to that and to think about our role in this and how we live our lives and how that's directly related to the ants and their contributions to keeping the rainforest intact. And the ants are indeed affected by climate change and all these things and habitat disturbance. So I used the most basic contact mic as my most successful tool last summer. It's just a cord clip-on mic. And those white hairs are homopterans, so they're scale insects. And at this phase in their life, they don't move. And basically the ants are farming them. And so the homopterans excrete sugary substances that the ants eat, and then the ants in return protect them. And they happen to be making sound. I clipped it on and I got a recording. So there's kind of like the sound of cicadas and some birds, but the ants are kind of like the whirly sound in there. And here's another sample where it's even maybe more clear. That was a Pheidole species, and this is what that ant looks like, quite small. So they co-evolved domestication with scale insects. And here's another ant. This is a leafcutter ant sound. So it's kind of like that evil laughter sound. You hear it in there. And this is another tool that I used, which was a kind of an extension to a contact mic, so I could pick up the ants' foot movements. These are army ants, and here's a setup recording leafcutter ants. And this is one of the results from Fabricio and Erica down in the Amazon, where they're looking at the calls and they want to make basically to catalog these calls and make sense of them and figure out differences between species and like the how and why and of all this. And we're really excited to combine our efforts because we just putting together this art and science is really exciting for all of us together, and we've already learned so much from each other, and I'm pretty sure we'll reach broader audiences by working together than otherwise. And so the Amazon work I put out in this little EP for tour, and I named it WOW, which is how they spell, UAU is how they spell wow in Brazil. So, and let me play one more piece. So the ant sounds, I've written 2 or 3 works so far that use these samples, and one of them will be performing later, but this is the version of that song that doesn't have any drums. And I mean, it has rhythm, but the rhythm is all from ant sounds. And it's called Multi-Species because it features army ants, the Pheidole they showed you earlier, leaf cutters, and I think one other. students, all based in Oregon, actually, who have been crucial to making this work happen. So thank you so much for listening.
So my name is Sabina Shack. I'm the director of the program on global environment in our environmental studies program here. So it's nice to meet another in environmental studies graduate, 2 degrees in environmental studies, I believe you have. And so I'm going to just start the conversation with Lisa, and we've got 15 minutes, and then I know she needs to go prepare for the next performance. So I'll start the conversation, and then we can open up to questions. We have a microphone here, so in a few minutes, we'll just ask you to come to the mic and ask questions. So thank you, Lisa, for being here today. And your work, when we learned about your work, we were very inspired, which is what led us to host the exhibits here today. And I hope we hear from some of the students and how they came to their inspirations as well. And so I guess my first question really is, how do you start, right? How do you decide where to go? How do you decide what you want to document? How do you decide if you're going to go to Hawaii, if you're going to go to, you give us some examples, but how do you really come to your place with all this?
All of these works were collaborative in nature, so I think like finding the right people to work with and the right timing is a big part of it. Like the Bee project I really wanted to do, and I felt like I had already made the connection with Carl Magnaka, and I tried to get funding for like 3 or 4 years before I was able to. And so when it got the funding, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to do it now. But I decided that one in particular that I wanted to do it because I had, and I really wanted to combine my music with science, and it seemed like the perfect thing because I knew about these insects that hardly anyone had paid attention to. And I was like, here's a perfect thing that I think is really important that I could use these skills that I had in music to get the word out and writing. So, yeah, and then, yeah, it's just kind of like timing and the financial sort of means to get it, to happen.
So the really practical part about funding, right? And we always hear about funding for arts and funding for science is a different thing. So it's, I don't know if people want to hear about this, but I'm sure artists want to know, how do you go about getting the funding? First, you obviously have to be very persistent to wait 3 years to get your project.
Yeah, we just kept trying. And we're really lucky in Oregon to have some amazing organizations that give a lot of artist grants. And so the Regional Arts and Culture Council especially has been really supportive. You just kind of learn how to write the grant, and then you just keep on trying. And with the Brazil thing, I got in, and then, as an artist, it's not easy to just buy like a $1,500 plane ticket and take off work for a month. And so I was lucky enough to get a grant for that. And the timing just for the deadline for the grant, where it worked just it fell into the right exact time that I could get it and get there in time and get my visa in time. So it's always just like, and everyone I talked to who I met there were 15 other artists there. Everyone had about the same kind of story going on, no matter where they were coming from, all over the world they come from. So it's all chance and luck and having the right idea at the right time.
So I have one more question related to that. You talked about the arts grants and that. Do you feel like there's support in the science community for what you're doing with respect to the arts?
Yeah, I mean, there's these amazing people like Nalini Nadkarni or Fabrizio Vaccaro who are like Fabrizio is looking for funding for me to return right now, and I am too. And like these people are so important because they're the ones really making that bridge between the arts and sciences. Because I know plenty of artists who want to work with scientists, and I feel like you have to look a little bit harder to find the scientists who want to work with artists. So they're totally out there and they're amazing, and so yeah.
So I had a question about the quote that you put up to start your presentation, and I don't remember the exact words of the quote, but have you tried to record that sound, the sound of humans drowning out nature?
I mean, I haven't intentionally tried to, but I've intentionally recorded human sounds. Yeah, so I guess I'm just, by the very nature of them, they are drowning out natural sound. When I was in the Amazon some mornings, there was this kitchen where we had these amazing meals every day, and there was like a radio on, and you had to walk like for 10 minutes into the forest before you didn't hear it anymore. And like your initial reaction as a field recordist, and there were, I think, 1 or 2 other people there trying to capture sound too, was like, oh man, we hear the radio, but then we're like, wait, that's part of it. This is like the situation, and to represent it otherwise wouldn't be like accurate. So it's part of, so it is blocking out the natural sound, but it's also like the truth of what's going on there. So.
Yeah, and I mean, part of the reason I ask is being here in Chicago or Portland, I would guess, maybe not as much in Portland in Chicago, but we have to sometimes try to hear nature here. And so, that process of trying to block out the sound of the city, which is an interesting sound in itself, but blocking it out so you can hear the birds, or squinting out so you can see the stars. And so, really thinking about how do you focus in on the sound of nature when you have all these distractions present.
Yeah, usually it seems like sitting still and stopping is like the best way. Because even when you're walking through a forest trail really fast, you might silence things, quite easily.
Yeah, so I had just a couple questions that students submitted, and then I'll definitely ask people to come up and do that. So, one thing that a couple of students asked this, a similar question really, is about how do you feel that what you're doing in your work may reach different audiences that aren't, met through other means of either through environmental work or arts work. How do you think what you're doing brings more people to the issues of the environment?
I think people just end up at our shows or at events I do just because of one thing they might be interested in, like they might be a drummer, or they might be an experimental musician, or they might be a biologist, or someone who's just concerned about the environment, and then in turn they end up learning about the other aspects of it, and hopefully the environmental topics as well. And I'm also totally okay with someone just listening to our music and enjoying it as music and not hearing any of the rest, but my hope is that it'll inspire conversation and the message will get out there more often than not. So.
And I guess one other question that came up related to that is when you engaged artists in this public comment process for environmental impact statements. I think that people may be familiar with environmental impact statements and they don't associate them with artists, right? But that's exactly what an environmental impact statement is doing, is talking about all the different impacts and the losses to society. So when you approached artists with this idea and this sort of collective activism, what was the response like? Were people familiar with that process, or?
No, people weren't familiar with it. I mean, the 2 women that I worked with, I forgot to mention their names. Amy Harwood, she has a history of working as an environmental activist and has a very intimate knowledge of these laws. And then Leaf Che Lee, who had never before visited the mountain. And so Leaf was kind of her story was similar to most of the artists we work with. We had to explain what an environmental impact statement was, what the process was, and all those details. And then, but once we got that info out, people were really excited to participate. And there was this idea that you didn't actually have to carry out the project. You just had to imagine up something that would happen in that space.
Do you plan to continue to do that? I mean, there's no shortage of environmental impact statements and cases out there, and artists in every part of the world, as you mentioned, to get involved. Do you plan to continue that?
Yeah, certainly. Our collaborator in Minnesota, Ryan, I saw him last night, and he mentioned another project, the rerouting of a natural gas pipeline that he wants to address with this project. So yeah, we're continuing to do it. Yeah.
So I just have one more question, and then I want to turn it over to people. So before we get to your performance, can you tell us something about your bandmates and how you all came together, and was it all inspired by environment, or how did you find this band?
Yeah. How did it all happen? So Secret Drum Band has had a rotating cast of musicians in it over a long time, and we've actually shrunk. We used to be 7, and Alan and Anthony both thought it would be easier to travel around the country with less. So it is. So we have 5 members right now, and Alan and I have been working together the longest in the ensemble. He joined in a number of years ago. And before that, it was a whole another group of people. any of them came together because of the environmental aspect of it. It was just music. I picked people or asked people to be in the ensemble because I liked how they played music and liked to be around them. And yeah, most of our time is spent like figuring out the particulars of all this stuff and how it happens, and you know, where we put this or that or this other thing. And the environmental stuff is definitely there when I introduce a new song, or when Alan, who also composes in the band, introduces a new song. We'll talk about, well, this is based on this place, we wrote this here, you know. So, yeah. So Zanny Ethel's right there, and then Anthony Brisson next to her, and Sam Humans, who's our ambient musician, is back there somewhere. And then that's Alan Wilson. Yeah, does that answer that?
So, any questions from the audience? I'm going to step up to the microphone too. Please introduce yourselves too.
Fred Siva is my name. I know nothing about what you spoke of today, except it's a learning experience. Have you developed an ability to hear better than us? Have you done anything in development of hearing better than normal?
No, if anything, I probably hear worse than most people in this room. Because I've been playing the drums for 31 years.
You use electronics.
Yeah, so certainly I use things to help me hear. So I definitely use headphones. So when you're sitting in an environment, even if you're using just a simple recorder, even if you're recording on your phone, the sound is amplified if you're wearing headphones. And it's magnificent, even just doing something as simple as that. And so that helps a lot. And then I have tools that I can use to amplify sounds, like a shotgun mic that is very directional. So if you hear a bird, points it at it, and then it'll pick it up. And then you move to the other side and don't hear that bird at all, and you hear something completely different that's calling from that direction. So that there's tools like that you can use. The contact mic is amazing. I mean, those are things that none of us would be able to hear without that tool. Yeah. So.
You must always be listening.
Yeah, and sometimes I put in my earplugs too. But yeah, I like to sit and listen, and I think staying still helps, like just sitting and waiting. Yeah.
Any other questions? Like,
Thank you so much. This was very interesting. My name is Yasemin Arsun Holsby, and I was wondering, what motivates you? Do you do your music for the sake of science, or science for the sake of music? And you mentioned you were in upstate New York getting your music undergrad. Which school were you at?
Oh yeah. So I was at SUNY Binghamton, and so I started as a music major, but midway through my sophomore year, I changed to environmental studies. And I continued with the music studies just on the side. So I was in the ensembles and stuff. That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, when it comes down to it, I feel like in order to feel good, I need to play music, and because go through the physical process of actually playing drums and the creative process of actually coming up with ideas, but also I would feel like a less whole human if I didn't go out into nature. So I think, and learn about nature in whatever way. So I think they're both kind of equal for me, yeah. Science and music.
another question? Still.
My voice is pretty loud, so I think people can hear me. But, hi, Lisa. Thank you so much. My name is Sylvia, and I work here in the University of Chicago, and I'm really astounded by the level of creativity that you bring to these projects, and I really value creativity, maybe even more than I value critical thinking. I'm a primary ecologist by training, and I continue to do some of my science. I work in Suriname right now, so I'm very tuned into everything that you're talking about. But you mentioned at some point with the UAU project, the WILD project, you said something about encouraging biocentric thinking.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about that. How do we encourage biocentric thinking? Elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah, so some of the thoughts with the recording ants that I've had are like, you know, like if I feel like humans are more likely to feel a connection with and a concern for other organisms if we can like see human qualities in them in some way. I don't know. I feel like that's like a pattern, and or like, you know, if you could see like a human quality in an animal's face or something. But these things are really hard to like see in insects, and and I think people just like most people could just write off insects as unintelligent or just of not having the kinds of organization and communication that we have. So I'm just really interested in this idea of being like, hey, look, ants talk, you know, talk. But they have like, you know, these evolved systems going on. Like this is something like we should have respect for them, just as we would any other species. And that's what biocentric thought calls to. So it's like, I think the most common rationale that I see in the news in environmental issues, discussion of environmental issues for taking care of the environment is for future generations of humans to have, you know, and I think that's like extremely important. But there's never like another part of that sentence in like, and because these animals all have an intrinsic right to exist. And that's where biocentric thought comes in. And so I kind of like see things in common between these ants talking and ideas around that. So.
I think we have one more question back here.
Hi, my name is Maji. I just want to see if you try to reproduce the sounds of what you record in the drum session, because I should wait to see you perform. But
Oh yeah. Yeah,
how
so
is it?
how do we use it?
Yeah.
In like different ways. So Alan has, or I sometimes use it, this SPDX. It's this machine right here that Roland makes, and it's a drum pad basically. And so we could play these pads and then they play samples. And so there's some field recordings that are played through that. And then Sam has a sampling pad over there, and then also a synthesizer called an organelle it's really cool, and you could build your own synth. So there's like an amp synthesizer that I made that he's gonna use, and yeah, and then so there's field recordings kind of mixed in, and then there's also interpretations of field recordings. So there was like a recording of a logging truck, and that became an oscillator playing the sound that sounded like the logging truck, and so that's the sound that you'll hear. So there's sometimes like a process. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just think they did machines with double up. They make sounds of waves.
Ah.
Drumming, so I was just trying to analyze.
Oh, cool.
The living creatures.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. We have one more question here. Okay. Great, any other questions? Well, I'll just finish with one last question. So for our students here that were exhibiting their work today who may be studying environmental studies or maybe double majoring in visual arts or other things, what is your, as far as I know, this is the first time there's been an exhibit like this here at this university. And so that may not be true, but that's as far as I know. What's your advice to these students to get their work out there, to get people to see their work too?
Just, I love the projects I saw. I walked around and saw most of them. They're really cool and inspiring. So thanks for making the work and being here. But as how to get your work out, I think putting it on the internet always helps. And then just presenting it, creating your own opportunities to present it, I guess, and just like telling people that you want to present it. Like I've learned, and it's really scary to ask, or to be like, I do this thing, you know, can we present it at your space, or do you want to do this creative project with me? And just like ask, you know, and like people will say, you'll get a bunch of no's, and then people will say yes, and then that's why you need those opportunities. So just ask and tell people what you're doing. I think that's been the best plan, I think, in my experience.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Lisa. We really look forward to your performance and the Super Drum Band.